The little girl stood in the cold station light, her tiny fingers trembling as she whispered, "You lost your mom and I lost my home." Her voice didn't echo. It cut, landing straight in the heart of the black woman sitting alone on the metal bench, wrapped in a coat that had forgotten warmth years ago. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening and the world needs to hear them. The black woman, Imani, mid-30s, warm brown skin, deep tired eyes, blinked slowly, unsure she had heard the child correctly. She had been sketching on the corner of an old notebook, lines shaking every time the December wind clawed through the station doors. She wasn't expecting anyone to come near her. People rarely did. But the little girl stayed. Imani glanced down. The child couldn't have been older than 7. Curly hair tied badly, jacket unzipped, small shoes damp with melted snow. There was something in her eyes, that heavy, adult sadness kids weren't supposed to carry. Imani swallowed. "Why? Why would you say that, sweetheart?" The girl stepped closer, her breath turning white in the frozen air. "Because you're always here. Same bench, same notebook. Daddy says some people lose their homes because they didn't try hard enough." Her voice cracked. "But you look like someone who tried." That hit harder than the cold. Imani forced a soft smile. "What's your name?" "Zoe," she whispered, eyes darting to the towering white man pacing near the ticket booth. Her father, Ryan, phone glued to his ear, completely unaware his daughter had wandered off. "Daddy says he's too busy to talk right now." The girl looked back at Imani. "But you look like you could hear me." Imani's chest tightened. She closed her notebook slowly. Sketches of buildings she once dreamed of designing. Sketches she still drew to remember who she had been before everything collapsed. Zoe shivered and whispered again, voice thin as paper. "Do you stay here because you have nowhere else?" And for the first time in months, Imani didn't know whether to lie or finally tell the truth. Imani hadn't always lived inside the hollow spaces of train stations. Before life unraveled, she used to spend her mornings in sunlit rooms, drafting designs that made entire neighborhoods dream again. She had been one of the few black women in her architecture program, not just talented, but impossible to ignore. Her professors used to say she saw structures the way poets see words. That felt like someone else's life now. The station heater groaned overhead, pushing out more noise and warmth. Imani rubbed her hands together, trying to chase away the bite of the cold. Across from her, a janitor mopped the tiles, glancing at her with that familiar mix of pity and judgment, the look every homeless person eventually learns to ignore. "Are you hungry?" Zoe asked suddenly, tugging at the edge of her own jacket as if embarrassed by her own question. Imani hesitated. She had eaten half a granola bar earlier. The second half was in her pocket, saved for later. "I'm okay," she said gently. "But thank you. That's very sweet of you." Zoe nodded, but the sadness in her expression didn't lift. "Mommy used to bring people food. She said you should always help someone who looks tired." She swallowed. "She got sick, and then she went away." Imani exhaled slowly. Kids shouldn't have to explain grief like that. Before she could respond, Zoe's father, Ryan, ended his call and muttered angrily into the air. "Unbelievable. I give these people money, and they can't handle one simple thing." He didn't look at Zoe, didn't look for her, didn't even turn his head. Zoe's shoulders sank. "Daddy's mad again." Imani followed the man's voice. Expensive coat, polished shoes, perfectly combed hair. Everything looked sharp except his awareness of his own child. Imani asked softly, "Does your dad know you're over here talking to me?" Zoe looked at her shoes. "He will, eventually." That answer bothered Imani more than it should have. Snowflakes drifted through the doorway as another train whooshed past without stopping. The gust swept through the waiting area, lifting a loose piece of paper from Imani's notebook. Zoe caught it before it fluttered away. The girl froze as she looked at the sketch, a detailed design of a community shelter with warm lighting and wide open windows. "You drew this?" Imani nodded. "It looks like a place where people feel safe." Imani looked at her, really looked. For the first time since the little girl had approached her, She saw something clearer than sadness in those young eyes. Recognition. And that recognition stirred something Imani had buried deep, a life, a purpose, and a fight she wasn't sure she still had the right to claim. Zoe held the sketch with both hands, as if it were something fragile and important. She traced one of the drawn windows with her small fingertip. Mommy used to say people need light when they're scared. Her voice trembled. This place looks like it has a lot of light. Imani felt a sting behind her eyes. It was supposed to, she whispered. Zoe looked up. Did you make it for people like you? Imani hesitated. I made it for people who needed a fresh start. The little girl nodded slowly, absorbing that. Then she surprised Imani again. Maybe that means you still know how to help people. Imani's breath caught. Kids didn't lie well, and Zoe wasn't lying now. A loud voice cut through the moment. Zoe. Ryan finally noticed his daughter wasn't standing beside him. His face tightened as he marched over. I told you to stay where I can see you. Zoe flinched. Sorry, Daddy. He barely glanced at Imani, but the quick, dismissive look said everything. Irritation, judgment, a silent accusation for letting his daughter talk to a stranger. Imani lowered her gaze, used to that reaction by now. Ryan grabbed Zoe's arm lightly, but firmly. We don't talk to people we don't know. Zoe whispered, but she's nice. That's not the point, he snapped. Imani stayed silent, letting the moment pass. But Zoe didn't look away. Her grip on the sketch tightened until the paper bent slightly. Daddy, she draws homes. Zoe's voice cracked. She draws places where people feel safe. Ryan exhaled impatiently. That's wonderful, Zoe. Come on. But Zoe didn't move. Daddy, she doesn't have a home. Ryan froze. So did Imani. The girl's voice broke completely this time. She's cold. And she didn't even ask for anything. She just listened to me. Why can't grown-ups be nice for no reason? Ryan's jaw clenched. For a second, one brief second, guilt flickered across his face. Then, just as quickly, he buried it. Zoe, enough. He straightened, avoiding Imani's eyes. We're leaving. But Zoe didn't let go of the drawing. Instead, she walked back toward Imani and held it out. You dropped this, she whispered. Imani took the paper carefully, her hands shaking a little. Thank you, sweetheart. Zoe lingered, lowering her voice. I think you're someone who's supposed to get back up again. The words pierced deeper than the cold. Before Imani could speak, Zoe's father called again, sharper this time. Zoe stepped away reluctantly. As the little girl rejoined him, Imani watched them walk toward the platform. The indifferent father, the grieving daughter, the fragile thread connecting them. And for the first time in months, Imani felt something she hadn't felt in far too long. Purpose. Small, faint, but alive. Imani sat frozen long after Zoe and her father reached the platform. The girl's words echoed through her. You're someone who's supposed to get back up again. She hadn't heard anything like that since before her life collapsed, before the betrayal, before everything she built was taken. She inhaled slowly, letting the ache return. She needed to feel it, because Berrien had only kept her stuck in this station. Months ago, Imani had been on the brink of becoming one of the youngest black women to lead a major architecture project downtown. Her design for community-centered housing had caught attention, including the interest of a large development firm run by one of the city's most respected executives. But she had trusted the wrong person, Ethan, her former business partner, a white man with flawless manners, wealthy family connections, and a smile that always seemed a little too polished. He had praised her talent, encouraged her dreams, and even called her the future of the firm. Then he used that same smile to gut everything she had built. He had taken her designs, her entire portfolio, and presented them as his own to the development firm. When she confronted him, he had twisted the narrative, calling her unstable, overworked, and too emotional to handle leadership. Using every stereotype, he could undermine her credibility. Within days, her name had become mud in the industry. That was the night she lost her apartment. That was the night she learned what silence from the system feels like when a black woman stands against a well-connected white man. But Zoe had looked at her drawings like they still mattered. Imani ran a thumb over the bent corner of the sketch, smoothing it carefully. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been gripping it. A gust of wind swept through the station, carrying Ryan's voice again, annoyed, frustrated, and loud enough to turn heads. He was arguing with someone on the phone, words spilling out in harsh bites. "Listen, I don't care what you think. I paid for that report. It better show what I want, or this whole project is dead." Imani's eyes narrowed. Report, project, those were not casual words. She recognized the tone, stressed, cornered, defensive. It was the tone of someone with something to hide. Zoe tugged his coat, whispering, "Daddy, stop yelling." Ryan waved her off, still pacing, still spitting threats. Imani studied him carefully. The polished coat, the expensive briefcase, and the panicked stiffness in his shoulders. He didn't look like a man who disliked homeless people. He looked like a man afraid of something far bigger. And Imani felt a faint, familiar spark inside her, the one she thought Ethan had killed. Suspicion, followed by instinct. Something was wrong with this man, something that connected him to more than just a little girl tugging at his coat. Something that, for the first time in months, Imani wanted to understand. Imani watched Ryan pace with that stiff, frantic energy, the kind you only see in people who are hiding a truth that's seconds away from slipping out. And when Zoe quietly whispered, "Daddy scares someone," Imani realized this wasn't just a stressed man, this was a man with a secret. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. Imani's gaze lingered on Ryan as he slammed his phone shut and let out a trembling exhale. He scanned the station, not for his daughter, but for anyone watching him. That told Imani everything. She had seen this look before. The night Ethan stole her designs, he looked the same way, jumpy, sweating under expensive cologne, terrified someone would expose him. The memory tightened Imani's chest. Ryan crouched in front of Zoe, trying to soften his expression. "Sweetheart, stay close, okay?" His voice cracked on the last word. Zoe nodded but didn't smile. "Did something bad happen?" she asked. "No," he blurted too fast. "No, everything is fine." Imani's instinct screamed. Something is absolutely not fine. The next moment confirmed it. A slip of paper fell from Ryan's briefcase as he adjusted it. Zoe noticed first. "Daddy, you dropped." But Imani saw what was before he snatched it back. A printed permit, a forged signature, a development logo she knew, a logo that belonged to the same firm Ethan had stolen her work to impress. Her pulse stumbled. Could this really be connected? Ryan shoved the paper inside and straightened with a forced calm. But his hands shook. His eyes darted toward the exits as if expecting someone to burst in. Imani stood slowly, notebook in hand. "Is everything okay?" she asked quietly. His head snapped toward her, eyes sharp with fear. "Mind your business." The venom caught her off guard, not because of the anger, but because of the desperation underneath it. Zoe stepped between them instinctively. "Daddy, she was just helping. I said enough." Ryan barked, immediately regretting it as Zoe flinched. Imani softened her voice. "Ryan, sometimes people yell when they're scared, not angry." His jaw locked. Imani continued gently. "Whatever you're dealing with, it looks heavy." Zoe looked up at her father. "Daddy, she's right." That single sentence broke him. Ryan's shoulders sagged, the weight of his secret pressing him down until he sank onto the bench opposite Imani. He pressed a hand over his face. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he whispered. Imani exchanged a look with Zoe, a silent question. And then Ryan said the words that made Imani's stomach turn. "I think someone is trying to destroy me, and I think I helped the wrong man." Imani's heart stopped. There was only one man she knew who could leave this kind of destruction in his wake. Ethan. Ryan's confession hung in the air, heavy enough to silence even the restless hum of the station. Imani felt her hands tighten around her notebook. She lowered herself on the bench beside him, careful, steady, not out of sympathy, but out of calculation. If Ethan was involved, this wasn't coincidence. This was a pattern. "Start from the beginning," she said softly. What did he tell you? What did he promise you? Ryan swallowed hard. His voice shook. A chance, a promotion, a place in a city project that would change everything. He said he had the permits, the investors, the approvals. All I had to do was push certain reports through my department. He rubbed his temples. I didn't even know I was signing off on forged documents until last week. Imani's pulse roared in her ears. Ethan's playbook, identical. Zoe climbed onto the bench next to him, leaning her head on his arm. He hesitated, then held her close, like someone finally realizing what actually mattered. I never wanted any of this, he murmured. Imani pressed. Why didn't you walk away? His voice cracked. Because he threatened to ruin me. He said I'd never work again, that he'd make the city see me as incompetent. And I believed him. His eyes lifted to Imani's. People like him get away with everything. Imani inhaled sharply. I know, she said, the words laced with months of buried pain. Ryan blinked at her, recognizing something in her tone. You've met him, haven't you? Imani nodded once. He destroyed my career, stole my work, left me with nothing but the clothes I ran out with. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The truth was sharp enough. Ryan looked stunned. He said you were mentally unstable, that you attacked him when he confronted you. His sentence died off, shame sliding across his face. Imani didn't flinch. He lied. And you believed him. He closed his eyes. I'm sorry. I should have questioned it. But people like me were taught to trust people like him. Zoe looked between them, confusion wrinkling her small face. Daddy, did that man hurt her too? Ryan nodded slowly. Zoe moved closer to Imani, placing a tiny hand on her knee. Then we have to help her. That simple sentence, sincere, fearless, cracked something inside Imani. Ryan straightened, wiping his eyes. He's meeting with the city board tomorrow. If they sign those documents, it'll be on me. And if they find out the truth afterward, he swallowed. My job is gone. My career is gone. Imani opened her notebook, flipping to the page Zoe had caught earlier. Then we don't let them sign anything. Ryan stared. What do you mean? Imani met his eyes with a calm, fierce steadiness. Ethan built his lies on stolen work and forged signatures. I have the originals, the timestamps, the drafts, the proofs he erased. She held up the notebook, and I have the last design he couldn't steal. Ryan's breath caught. That's enough to expose him. It's enough to end him, Imani corrected quietly. Zoe squeezed Imani's hand. You can stop him, right? Imani didn't hesitate. Yes, she said, but we do it together. Tomorrow would not be another night in the station. Tomorrow, Ethan would face the woman he tried to bury. By the time Imani stepped into the city board meeting the next morning, she could feel it, that quiet shift in the air when a truth too big to stay hidden finally begins to rise. And she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Ethan had no idea the woman he tried to erase was already standing inside the room. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it. The meeting room buzzed with polite greetings and the scratch of pens on legal pads. Ryan sat stiffly near the end of the table, hands clasped tightly to keep them from shaking. Zoe was outside with a receptionist, drawing in a coloring book Imani had bought her that morning. She had insisted on coming for luck. Ethan entered moments later. Tailored suit, confident stride, smiles sharpened for influence. He nodded at the board members, shook hands with the mayor's assistant, and stopped mid-step when he finally saw Imani. His smile faltered, just a flicker, but it was enough. Imani didn't look away. Good morning, Ethan. His voice wavered. You shouldn't be here. Ryan stood. She has every right to be here. Board members exchanged confused glances. The chairman cleared his throat. Mr. Collins, your associate seems concerned. Should we know something before reviewing your proposal? Imani stepped forward, placing her notebook and a neatly organized folder on the table. Yes, she said calmly. They should know everything. She spoke with no anger, no tremble, just truth. She presented the forged permits, the stolen design files, the time-stamped drafts from her computer, the originals Ethan thought he'd erased. The manipulated evaluations he forced Ryan to submit. Every piece landed like a stone dropped into still water. The room went silent. Ethan's face drained as denial crumbled under hard evidence. His voice cracked. "Imani, think about what you're doing." "I am," she replied. "For the first time in months, I am." Board members whispered among themselves. The chairman lifted the fake permit, comparing signatures. "Mr. Collins, this is fraud. Federal-level fraud." Security moved closer. Ryan exhaled, long, shaky, relieved. Later, outside the building, Zoe ran straight into Imani's arms. "Did we win?" she asked breathlessly. Imani knelt so their eyes met. "We didn't just win," she said softly. "We stopped something bad from hurting more people." Ryan joined them, still stunned by the weight lifted from his shoulders. "You saved my life," he murmured. Imani shook her head. "Zoe saved us both." For the first time in a long time, she felt the future open instead of close. Not as the woman Ethan tried to bury, but as the woman who refused to stay underground. And as she walked out of the city building, hand in hand with Zoe, the winter wind didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like a beginning.